Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are finally here with my LTA North week number 3 overview and analysis video. Again, I really apologize for getting this one out so late. By the time this comes out, we'll probably be through the first 2 days of week number 4. I really do apologize. A lot's going on in real life right now. I hope you guys can forgive the fact that this video is much later than I would want it to be, but LEC took a backseat last week. I thought it was only fair that LTA took the backseat this week. Again, we're going to be going over everything that happened in week 3 at the end of the positioning phase and kind of talking about where these teams are landing. I haven't seen anything from week number 4, and so there's not going to be any spoilers in this video for that. Not that you guys probably haven't already seen a lot of those games, but just for context, this is going to be entirely about week number 3, and of course, we'll still cover week number 4 at the right time next week. Again, hopefully we're going to get back on the schedule. I'm moving houses right now, and so everything is just a little bit more chaotic than usual during the day, so hope you can forgive me. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the content. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each game that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. Of course, we will be updating my power rankings from number 1 to number 8. Like I said, I have not seen anything from week number 4 yet, and so no worries about spoilers affecting my power rankings in that regard. Not that I'm expecting anything crazy to happen. The LTA has been pretty predictable so far this year, but it will be entirely based off of week number 3. So without further ado, with all of that out of the way, this is the longest week of the positioning phase. Instead of 2 days, it's 3 days. That means 12 best of 1s to cover before we get into the best of 3 stage. We'll be previewing the groups at the end of this as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. Our first day was kicked off with a really fun matchup on paper, 1 loss combined between these two teams. FlyQuest taking on LYON, and FlyQuest is going to be able to pick up the win, and they're going to do it pretty much entirely effortlessly. There were some mistakes coming in from Fly. That bot dive certainly wasn't ideal, but outside of that, this was just a skill gap between these two teams, and that's where I think LYON's going to run into a lot of their problems. I just don't know if they're going to have the consistent skill to be able to go up against actual good teams at this level. It is very clear that they are the best of the rest in terms of the bottom, 4 in the LTA, but I do not think they have the capability of cracking that top 4, at least in my opinion. This game kind of backs up that thought process. FlyQuest stays undefeated. They move to 5-0. Busio's life stays intact for now. If you don't know what I'm referencing, go to Twitter. I'm sorry, there's nothing else I can do to explain that, but FlyQuest stays undefeated at least at the start of this week, and they do it through solo lane dominance because it just was an absolute masterclass, and that really begs the question whether or not LYON did any homework at all coming into this game, because Quad ends up picking what most consider to be his staple champion, not only from his time here in North America, because he's played it a ton, not only at the tier 2 level, but at the tier 1 level and the international level, but this guy was a Casio one-trick forever in solo queue when he was in Korea. Like, that's the thing that Quad is known for. It's the reason he got on the pro radar at all, and so it didn't really feel like they were particularly prepared to play against the Casio, but also they didn't really expect Bwipo to be able to dominate 1v1 on the top side. Licorice didn't seem like he knew the Galio matchup very well, and things just went south very quickly for LYON, and unfortunately for them, there just was no way to recover. Player of the game really should go to one of the solo laners. I actually kind of deliberated on this for a bit. Whether you want to go with Bwipo, whether you want to go with Quad, I think is up to you. I think both of them were absolutely extraordinarily good in this game. I'm going with Quad just because the Casio matchup was probably even more depressing to watch if you were a LYON fan. Saint is obviously not going to be praised for his performance on Azir in this game. It's certainly his worst of the spring split, but Quad just completely manhandled that matchup, ends up getting a solo kill. Not that Bwipo didn't also get a solo kill on the top side, but Quad I just think was super impressive. Again, I don't want to take anything away from either of these two. Both of them were absolutely terrific. I'm really glad to see that Quad has really, I'm not going to say stepped up his game, because he's always been very good as an individual lane player, but I think he's playing the best he has ever right now here in North America. That includes his time on DRX and Nongshim back in the LCK. I think this is the best version of Quad that we have ever gotten, and I'm really excited to see that the confidence has really come through. He knows he can dominate people in lane because he's just more mechanically talented than almost everybody in the region. Basically, everybody that isn't named Quid just doesn't have the mechanics to be able to keep up, and that includes someone like Saint that we really value highly. So credit to Quad in that regard, and Bwipo, like I said, was also fantastic. His Rumble was terrific in lane in that matchup into Galio. Typically, you're drafting the Rumble to try and team fight a little bit more efficiently later on in the game. Not that Rumble isn't a good laner, just that that's kind of the idea behind the champion, especially with the Galio counter pick, and Bwipo won it anyways because he really is just better than Licorice, and it's clear that Licorice didn't know the matchup very well. Inspired, Masu, Busio, they were all really good. Busio in particular, I thought had a really excellent game on the Alistar to be able to set things up after like 15 or 20 minutes into the game as we got into the team fight stage, but but this game was over once we got the 2 solo kills in the solo lanes, and from that point onwards, it was always going to be very difficult for LYON to be able to take it, and you kind of have to blame their solo laners for that. As much as I'd like to throw some criticism onto a player like Henna, who I thought played awful in this game and really generated nothing for LYON throughout this entire thing, or even someone like Odie Land that I think hasn't been quite as good as he was in that first week of the best of 1 stage, this is Saint and this is Licorice really letting the team down, and Saint's going to get my dead of the game for it. His Azir was just tremendously bad. He didn't understand the matchup here between Azir and Cassio. He overstepped way too far, ends up getting solo killed, and his game is actually just over. At that point, he ends up playing out the mid game incredibly poorly. I think this was just a learning experience for Saint. There is a reason I've been pushing back on the, oh, Saint is the #1 mid laner type of hype that we've been seeing over the course of this split. I get that this guy's really good, but he's been playing the worst mid laners in the league over and over again. He's finally going to get, kind of a reality check across this week in terms of the players that he does have to play against, and we'll see how he holds up, at least in this first little test. It did not go particularly well, and we're going to have to see. I was a little bit lower on Saint's current ability coming into the league, and this is more of what I expected. I think he is a good mid laner, a top 4-ish mid laner in the region, but I just don't know if he can get higher than that if he's going to have performances like this. And then Licorice just continues to be feast or famine on the top side is the best way to put it. Confidence-based, momentum-based, I think is a more accurate way to put it, where when this team is winning, he looks great. When this team is not winning, he looks awful. He did not understand this Galio matchup. Getting solo killed here in the 1v1 is absolutely diabolically bad, but the reason he's not getting dead of the game is because I think his solo death was less consequential to the success of FlyQuest overall than Saint's. I think, the Azir losing in the mid lane and being taken completely out of the game, like that was a real problem where you could probably recover from not having a Galio. It just ended up being that both of them were really bad and the rest of the team really crumbled. Like I said, it's not like anybody else here on LYON played well. This was a romp. Like, this was not even remotely close, but LYON's gonna need to bounce back. Their schedule does not get easier from here, and for FlyQuest, 5-0, they are genuinely staring down the barrel of a 7-0 best of 1 stage. That obviously would be fantastic, especially with how things went down in the winter split, but you gotta keep your foot on the gas. It's just game number 1. Then moving on to our second game of day number 1, and this one was a big one. 2 top 4 teams is always good. It's Cloud9 taking on Team Liquid, and Cloud9 is going to pick up the very dominant victory here, the very clean victory, and it's really easy to identify where things went right for Cloud9 and where things ended up going wrong for Team Liquid. This was more of a team loss, I would say, for TL. I wouldn't kind of look into these KDAs and just point out, oh, a couple of players actually played well and the other players let the team down. I think this is much more everybody on Team Liquid not playing well, and Cloud9 just having the best player on the Rift, really the best 2 players on the Rift that I really want to give a gigantic shout out to, because this was a statement-making performance from Cloud9 and a bit of a victory lap for me, because this bot lane for Cloud9 has been really good over the course of this year, and I think I got a bit of hate on my primer video at the beginning of the year back in January, talking about how I thought Sven and Vulcan were going to be really positive for this team. Maybe it's not going to be what Berserker was, but Vulcan was my #1 support in North America heading into the year. I think he's lived up to that. Sven has been just as good as I was anticipating. I'm really excited to see these two playing well, and Vulcan is going to get player of the game here for Cloud9. The Bard was just absolutely tremendous. Like, this is the playmaking, star performance Vulcan that we have seen multiple times over the past couple of years. I think people just forget that this guy is as good as he is. After he left Cloud9 the first time, things were a little bit more rocky. The Evil Genius's tenure was pretty solid. I think people forget that he was very good on that team, but he goes to FlyQuest and things kind of don't work out for that team. There are a lot of things going wrong for Fly. He comes back to Cloud9 last year, and he has to play with Berserker, and they never really find their chemistry, but Vulcan gets way better going into summer. Even if Berserker wasn't playing at, a top level, Vulcan was certainly playing at a top level, and I think people just kind of looked at some of the negative games and just the general perception of Vulcan and saw him as a bit of a washed player in the support position, especially considering the young talent that had really been breaking out in that role. Players like Busio, players like Ayla, obviously Core JJ still being incredibly solid. Vulcan more so fell by the wayside in terms of a lot of the conversations. I held pretty firm going into the year that he was the #1 support. I held firm going into spring that he still was the #1 support, and I think he's backed that up. He's been tremendously good. He outplayed Core JJ, who really is the player that you're going to be considering for that #1 spot against him in this game, and he did it on a playmaker that can take over the map. I just am really impressed by where Vulcan is at. This reminds me so much of 2020 Vulcan, and I know that feels like a long time ago, a forever ago, but Vulcan has really gotten back into form. Him and Sven obviously just have exceptional chemistry as as a duo, and I think getting them together as a 2v2 has been nothing but positive for Cloud9, and it's helped Sven as well. I've been very high on him throughout his entire career. Really, there's not been a time, maybe outside of the TSM days, where I've looked at him as a player that maybe is a bit overhyped. He was awesome in Europe. He comes over to TSM. There's so much wrong with the version of that team that he ended up playing for, but he came over to Cloud9 and was excellent for that roster, at times actively carrying them, especially when they really needed him. And, he was a big reason why that team found so much success through a lot of that era, even if they weren't going to Worlds and dominating there. Sven was still a really big positive. He ends up, role swapping to support, and that's where things, I think, got a little bit lost for me, where I was like, maybe he's not as good as I was claiming him to be, but he goes back to AD carry. I thought he was great last year for Dignitas. Certainly the best player on that team when they desperately needed somebody to try and pick up wins for them, and comes back to Cloud9 and it's been great. Sven is just a player I really believe in. He's not going to have the highest of highs, but he's incredibly stable. And this 2v2 against the 2v2 gods on the other side of this of LYON and Core JJ was exceptionally good. When you're going into LYON on Kalista and you win in lane, that's a statement. That's not just a passing thought. That is something that you can actually go, okay, there's something here, because not anyone can just do that. That's how impressive that feat is. The rest of this team continues to be good. Loki's been awesome in the spring split. He's genuinely been one of my favorite players to watch. I think he's been super fun as a primary carry. Again, I was more so worried that he wasn't going to have the same kind of opportunities against good teams. That's not happened. He's looked great on things like Azir throughout the whole split. Blabber is really kind of stabilized. I think they've started moving away from making him primary option as a carry in a lot of these team comps, and I think he's filled his role a little bit better now that Loki and Sven and Vulcan and Thanatos are stepping up as being, more carry-oriented options. Blabber is always going to be at his best as a facilitator, and I think that is his role once again. Thanatos is still really great in lane, and Impact is bad in lane. This one, as you expected. Cloud9 dominated this one. It wasn't close, and for Team Liquid, I think you can kind of give dead of the game to everybody. Like, this really is a team loss. I'm not going to single out one player significantly more than the other. That being said, I am giving dead of the game to APA, because that is how things work here. APA continues to be kind of poor when he doesn't get resources in the early game. I get that he's much more of a late game team fighter, and I do like him on these roaming champions, and I've been much higher on his split than a lot of other people have been, but the feast or famine nature of APA has been on full display so far in spring. Almost all of their wins are through the middle of the map, with APA generating a ton of pressure and being able to carry in team fights because he is a phenomenal team fighter, and a lot of their losses have been APA just getting absolutely trounced in the mid game and not really being able to generate enough pressure. It's very, I don't want to say predictable, but Team Liquid does kind of flow through the middle of the map, and that's not necessarily where you want that pressure to flow through when you have LYON and Core in the bot lane. That being said, LYON and Core lost in the 2v2. They played Kalista Renata and did not win in the bot lane. This is kind of a big deal. This doesn't really happen to them. They pretty consistently win the 2v2, even if they're not the most successful throughout the entire game. The pre-10 minutes is almost always in favor of them. I can't even really remember a time where they would get champions this strong and actually lose early on in the game. Again, credit to Sven and Vulcan in that regard, but LYON and Core not having the best game of their lives. Umti continues to be fine, but not extraordinary, and Impact is genuinely one of the worst performing top laners in the entire league at the current moment. The dude cannot play. I don't know what has happened to Impact. He has lost his ability to even function at an LTA caliber level. Again, it's a Scion game. I'm not blaming him too much, but we're going to talk about him more later on in the week. This is kind of a bad loss for Team Liquid, but this is a great win for Cloud9. They could be a top 2 team. If we saw this team winning the LTA and representing the North at MSI this year, I'm really not going to be all that surprised, but with one spot, you got to be able to keep things up. Again, the LTA gets 2 spots, but only one of those goes to the North, and so if Cloud9 do want to continue this nice run, they're going to have to continue to prove it throughout this week. Then moving on to game number 3 here of day 1, and will one team finally be able to pick up their first win? Unfortunately not for them. It's Dignitas taking on 100 Thieves, and 100 Thieves is going to walk away with the victory, but this one was incredibly close. Dig had a lead for a majority of this game, and they just couldn't quite close it out. Tomo had a fantastic game on the Varus. He continues to really kind of grow into his role back here on Dignitas, obviously coming off of last year where he played for both Dig and 100 Thieves, and I guess DSG a little bit in tier 2 in the middle. He's kind of getting readjusted, I think, to being a number 1 option on a bad team rather than a number 3 option on a good team like he was on 100 Thieves last year. But, unfortunately, it's just not enough. Dig don't have the firepower to be able to win these late game team fights, even with the draft that they have. They throw their lead and 100 Thieves come back and win it, but it's really through the stars of 100 Thieves and the core of this team. The players that you really think about when you think of 100 Thieves, and it starts with Quid. Like, the entire 100 Thieves conversation starts with Quid. He's going to get player of the game for the Silas. This dude is unreal. Like, I will continue to die on the hill that he is absolutely in the running for best player in North America. It's him, it's LYON, it's Inspired. It's those three. That's the conversation. They are a tier above everybody else in North America at the current moment, and it's just really impressive to see Quid always come out and really make a difference in the back half of these games, regardless of the position that he's in, and regardless of whether or not he put himself in that position. Like, I think he played fine at the beginning of this game, but he was down in resources because Dig was doing a lot of really nice things on the bottom side of the map. I think, Tomo and Isles obviously had a really good early game, but Shaden, I thought, was at least active on the map on the Neferi. Quid stayed hungry, stayed aggressive, stayed looking for a lot of these plays to make, and found a lot of them by the end of the game, which was really impressive to me. Continue, again, to just be impressed by what Quid is as a player. Not only is he mechanically talented enough to be able to dominate at this level, because he's right up there with Quad in terms of being the most mechanically talented mid laner in North America, but he also has a really good sense of the map. He's a great macro player. He just understands how to be a top-tier player in League of Legends. He has grown into a fantastic player that I hope one day to either see like near the top of North America, international stage regularly, or hell, even back in the LCK. I think he would have deserved that move, kind of similar to what Berserker did this offseason. Hopefully not on a team like Berserker has, but River was also tremendous at the end of this game on the Sejuani. He actually just played great throughout the entirety of this game. I was really impressed with him on the Sejuani, just getting back to basics. Again, I know that River is kind of looked at as a playmaker, and the Jarvan, the Wukong, like those are the things that kind of pop out to you when it comes to River individually as a player. The Vi kind of fits into that category as well, but I've always thought he's at his best, especially for where this team is at, when he's on Sejuani, when he's on Maokai, when he can just be that primary facilitator, and we saw that in the back half of the game. He's a super consistent team fighter. Again, the macro part is where he knows exactly where he's supposed to be. He can get outplayed by players who are a bit more talented than him, but when he's set into a position where he can just be reliable no matter what, there is enough talent on this team to be able to enable. You just have to be there to do it. Sniper, I thought, had a great game on the Jace. He's been much better in spring than he has been recently. Hopefully that form keeps up. Again, he's a pretty inconsistent top laner, but he dominated Surdy in lane. Not that a lot of people haven't, and not that this matchup isn't particularly good, but FBI and Alo were, I guess, fine. They didn't exactly win early. FBI has certainly been a little bit weaker than he was in winter. Not that I think that that's entirely unexpected, but 100 Thieves still have enough firepower to be able to win a lot of games at this level. And for Dig on the other side, this is just such a disappointing loss. Like, truly, this is a heartbreaker because you had it in the palm of your hand, and this would have been your first win of the entire split. It feels like everything has collapsed for this team, and unfortunately, like Surdy, the big offseason addition that we were all hyping up, he's been maybe the least valuable player in the entire league. He's going to get dead of the game for me on the Scion. It feels like it's a bit harsh. I get that this lane matchup isn't easy early, but this is like a counter pick, right? Like, this is thought of as something that is strong for Scion because you can negate a lot of that damage in the mid game and be more useful than the Jace as, 15 minutes go on, and especially with the lead that Dignitas had, it felt like they were going to be able to just kind of play through this tank on the top side. Surdy had no idea what he was doing, not only in lane, but out of lane on this champion, and generally it's just kind of felt like he's been lost at this level. We know he can be really good. This guy dominated tier 2 for so many years on multiple different orgs through multiple different situations. Good teams, bad teams, mediocre teams, whatever. He's always been good at the tier 2 level. It's just not translated so far to tier 1. He's been quite bad for this team. I think you can point to a couple of other areas. I think Tomo was a little far forward at the end of the game here, just opening himself up to a bit more damage than he needed to be, but he was the primary carry option. I'm certainly not going to critique him too heavily. Shaden on Neferi probably needed to take over the back half of this game more than he did. He was more of a secondary piece, not really what you draft Neferi for. Isles, I think, was a little bit over-aggressive at times, but it's really hard to nitpick these things because at the end of the day, like, this is kind of what you want to see. You want to see them try to go out and make plays. The plays just didn't work. Like, that's really what it is. Dignitas just didn't have the talent to be able to win fights at the end of the game, even with the lead that they got. It was super greedy, super aggressive, and honestly, it's just unfortunate. I think they did what they were supposed to do and just couldn't win it. And 100 Thieves is better than them, and that's kind of what they showed. River and Quid continue to be excellent. If this bot lane can get kind of back into form, and if Sniper can just continue to be a positive and not a negative on the top side, this still can be one of the best teams in North America. They stayed at number 3 in my power rankings for a reason, but that top 4 continues to get more and more crowded. They're going to need to get more consistent at playing through the early game if they want to be considered a favorite. Then moving on to our fourth and final game of the first day here in week number 3, we had a matchup between Shopify Rebellion and Disguised, where Shopify is going to pick up the victory, a 36-minute win for them here. Disguised is also going to move to 0-5. That definitely makes the DSG versus Dig matchup tomorrow a lot more interesting with both of them being winless, but Shopify ends up moving to 2-3. And again, I think this team is fine. I think that they have enough, to be able to not be the worst team in the league or anything like that. There is a real shot that they're going to make the playoffs, if only because the bottom two teams in the LTA are just very, very bad. But this team still has like core issues. They just didn't necessarily come out in this game. And that being said, I also think that there is generally some fan sentiment around this team that is a little bit unfair, which again, I will get into, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to Seos on this Alistar. We got some fantastic support performances here on day number 1. Happy to see that. NA has kind of been a region where people have talked about support a bit negatively over the past few years, especially in terms of depth and just talent at the, top end level. I think we got a really good glimpse that it's actually really good right now in North America in terms of supports for the LTA. Of course, you can make, questions about like the tier 3 depth or anything like that, but Seos was tremendous in this game, and I think as a playmaker, he can still come in and be a really valuable piece to this team. Remember, he didn't get really the chance to practice at all with this team at the beginning of the year. He wasn't here for the winter split because he couldn't get his visa in time, and so he was just hopeful that he was going to be in for spring. He does end up obviously making it in for the spring split, and he's been an upgrade to this team. He's definitely been better than what Zeyzal was for them in the winter split, and I think he could continue to get better. This is a player who I've raved about in the past coming out of the CB lull. I always thought that he could be a player that really made a difference in a major region, and that's exactly what he's doing here. Of course, playing with B-Voy definitely makes things a bit easier because B-Voy's very good at most facets of the game, but Seos was the guy for the team in this one, and I want to give him a shout out there. The other two players that I think are worth mentioning for Shopify in a really positive manner, because everybody here won for Shopify, are Fudge and Contracts on the top side. Contracts has just been great for this team throughout the whole year, regardless of whether or not they're playing well. He has easily been the saving grace for Shopify, and he's the reason this team is going to stick at number 6 or be a top 6 team in most people's power rankings, is because it's just so hard to imagine a world where Contracts just stops being good in the jungle for this team. I know he can be a bit inconsistent and maybe things flip going into summer because that's sometimes what happens with him as a player, but at least in terms of the form that he's been in, not only this year, but the last couple of years, I just really believe in the talent. I believe in the player in Contracts, and he's been great this year, regardless of what's happened to his solo laners throughout a lot of these earlier games. He continues to be great here on the Jarvan. I very much considered giving him player of the game. I thought he was arguably the most influential player for Shopify here. Ended up kind of moving away from that, giving it to Seos, but I think it should go to one of those two, although I think you could give it to Fudge on the top side, who continues to make strides of improvement. I got some comments even on my videos last week talking about how Fudge is a player that, was never actually that good, that, a lot of people really doubted. I can only really give my opinion. I know that the community has kind of turned against him as a player. I shouldn't even say turned against him. Again, I think a lot of people just have always been against Fudge. I've kind of always been in the Fudge corner. I've always tried to defend what he was. I think he should have won MVP in, 2023 spring, I want to say. One of those splits with Cloud9, I think it was 2023 spring. I think Fudge probably should have won MVP that year or that split, and he didn't, and I think generally has been overlooked a long time. This guy has always been a really good player, with the exception of this year. And I know a lot of people are like, see, I told you, I proved you that it was, just the Cloud9 system that ended up making him good, that he wasn't actually that good of a top laner. I still think there's something in there. Right now, it feels like a confidence thing for me. And again, if people want to disagree with that down in the comments and say that, Fudge is not a good player and that there's nothing to be gained from having him on the team, that he should be replaced, that's fine. Everybody's allowed their own opinion, but my opinion is that Fudge still can be a top 2 or a top 3 top laner in North America if you put him in the right situation. I think he has the mechanics to do it. He's just not been able to unlock it. Castle's an okay player. He was awesome in winter, not been so good in spring, but Fudge dominated this matchup, and he was really good at the end of last week as well. Hopefully that confidence is starting to come around, and hopefully he can start playing better. Palafox was fine. That's a good sign. He's been the detrimental piece for Shopify, in my opinion, and B-Boy was certainly good enough in the bot lane. Shopify has things to build around. They just need to find consistency. And then for DSG, this team is bad, and they're really bad in specific areas. I think there are multiple players on this team that are just the worst in their role by a large margin, starting, of course, with Abadaga in the mid lane. His rise was tremendously not good in this one. He realm warped into his own death at the end of the game. There are obviously some really negative plays to point out for him, and this has been a recurring trend for not only him, but for DSG in general. He's been probably the worst player in the LTA. I know I kind of claimed that Surdy was in that conversation. I think Abadaga's kind of running away with that award at the current moment for me. This guy's not winning in the 1v1 in the mid lane. He's not doing anything in the mid to late game. It feels like he's entirely mental boomed. I've said it multiple times already on this channel. I think DSG simply has to move in a different direction in the mid lane, because I understand that, the season's kind of lost. You're not going to be a playoff team. Remember, they're taking up the guest spot at the current moment. And if the guest spot is going to be up for, fighting at the end of the split, like DSG has a chance to stay in it if they can replace mid lane. I think they got to find a new guy there though, because Abbedagge right now simply isn't good enough. It's easier said than done though, because a lot of tier 2 teams probably aren't going to want to give over their mid laner because they think they have a shot of being able to beat DSG and move up into that guest spot. So all of a sudden things become a bit more tricky in that regard, but I also think XU has continued to just not be a positive. In fact, probably be the worst jungler at this level. Again, just very disappointing to say. I think that there were some expectations for XU. They've just not been met at any point. A lot of tier 2 players have struggled at the tier 1 level this year. XU has always thrived with good laners, especially good solo laners. He does not have that here. Castle's been okay. Again, like I said, he was not very good in this game, but at times he's been all right. Scary Jerry and Huhi had one of their weakest games of the spring split. Scary Jerry's probably been the positive so far over the course of spring, but it's not like he's been consistent at all. DSG's just not very good. Like, that's unfortunately the takeaway, especially if they're going to have Abbedagge in the mid lane and really even XU in the jungle. I think this team is always going to struggle at the tier 1 level, and that's unfortunate. But for Shopify, they are better than the bottom tier teams. They're on pace to be a playoff team. Top 6 is playoffs in the LTA, and I think, again, they're on pace to do that. Is the consistency there right now? No, but they had a really tough start to the split in terms of the teams they had to face. I think they're going to be, collecting some extra wins down the stretch here, and I think there's generally going to be some more momentum going into their favor once we get into the group stage. Now, will they do anything with that? I'm not sure, but at least for now, they're definitely playing better than they did a couple of weeks ago. Then moving on now to day number 2, our middle day here of week number 3, and it's a good matchup to kick us off. It's LYON taking on 100 Thieves, and 100 Thieves is going to pick up the victory here. Again, no gigantic surprise or anything like that coming out at the beginning of day 2. We expected LYON to really struggle across this week because they were exclusively playing some of the best teams in the league. We kind of talked about it last week where they just had a really easy schedule at the start. They basically only played the bad teams, and now their schedule's ramping up, and they're kind of really going to get tested, and get tested they are. Like, I know it's a weird sentence, but they are definitely kind of falling into the trap here of just not being able to go toe-to-toe against teams that are actually good and kind of getting a lot of their flaws exposed in the process. There is some good to take away here, but certainly some bad as well. For 100 Thieves, this is just a very complete team in its current state. I think they can do almost everything, and they're taking advantage of the fact that the bottom of the standings really isn't all that good at anything, so they're picking things like Jace and Talia and Neferi, and obviously these are super broken champions, but they're doing this while also knowing that they're going to be able to out team fight and out 5v5 anybody that they're going to go up against at the bottom of the standings because they're just better. And that's exactly what they did. They didn't get the biggest early lead in the entire universe. They won 5v5 team fights down the stretch as Talia and Neferi and Ezreal, which is even more impressive in my opinion. But player of the game for me is going to go to Sniper on the top side. He's been awesome across the 2 games so far this week, and quite frankly, he's been better in the spring split. Now, I know it's a small sample size and Licorice is a bit of a disaster on the other side, which we will, of course, talk about as we do on this channel, but it is nice to see that Sniper can get the job done when he has the opportunity to. The Jace looked really good here, and I think he's playing with a lot more confidence again. It reminds me a lot of spring of last year rather than summer, where I think the expectation for him got a little bit too high, started getting in his own head after a couple of losses to some really good top laners, and I think things just kind of spiraled out of control for him. I think things have gotten back on track. I think he's starting to feel a bit more comfortable with this specific configuration of the team once again, and I do think he's starting to perform once again like a borderline top half top laner. I know that that's kind of a contentious list at the current moment. There are quite a few top laners that are pretty good, but he's almost certainly top 4, just in terms of how top lane has gone. Like, Impact's not playing particularly well. You can make an argument he's the 3rd best top laner right now in North America, and that's just how things are going, because top lane's not been that dominant of a role outside of Thanatos and Bwipo, who are both excellent. Like, obviously, I'm playing into that, but Sniper might be right behind them in terms of his current form, and I think that that is such a huge plus for 100 Thieves that they just didn't have last year, that this team is better right now than they were in 2024, which is a good sign. I still want to point out River and Quid, because I still continue to believe that they are the core of why this team is winning games. Even if Sniper was the most important player, in my opinion, in terms of the damage and the lead that he was able to generate on the top side, River and Quid are just so good at the late game that it makes 100 Thieves so difficult to beat in almost any circumstance. They can lose early and still come back in almost any game situation because you just trust these two. Now, River did it on Neferi in this game, which is somehow even more impressive than the Sejuani game because we know he can do it on facilitators. I've been talking about how that's easily his best best champion type over the past couple of weeks, and especially the last year or so. But Quid being able to dominate on Taliyah with River on something like Neferi, that's another level that 100 Thieves can then tap into to try and win games. It's not something that's been super successful for them, but it's definitely something that they showed here that they can get away with. FBI and Ayla continue to be fine. Henna was fine on the other side of this. This is the second game in a row where the opposite AD carry has been good into 100 Thieves, but overall their team is just way more complete, and I think they are starting to find an identity as a unit, and they're just kind of showing that they're more mechanically talented regardless of the game state. And for LYON, they just don't have the talent to be able to keep up right now, and it's not even the players that you would expect, although it is kind of some of the players that you would expect, because LYONs is going to get my dead of the game here in the support position. This Nautilus was really bad, I think almost underratedly bad in this game. A lot of people are going to point to Licorice as being the dead of the game here, and trust me, I'll get into that. I don't think he was very good. He was basically invisible on the top side, but I would take invisible Cassante over Nautilus trying to play like the biggest playmaker in the universe any day of the week. LYONs was constantly going in without really a lot of team support and really without a lot of backup, and most of the time it just ended up with absolutely nothing, with the game kind of falling out of LYON's favor. This was just one of those games where LYONs, for LYON, just was disconnected from everything that the rest of the team was doing. He took too much of an onus on himself to be a primary playmaker for the team, and it ended up really hurting them. Again, if you wanted to give dead of the game to Licorice, I do kind of follow the idea there, the trend, because the Cassante was basically invisible, and he just lost really hard in lane 1v1 to Sniper. Licorice has been bad, arguably the worst top laner in the league across this year, and that's not changing here, but I think LYONs' mistakes were more detrimental to the game overall. I also want to say that Saint continues to not have a very good week number 3. This is the second Azir game that he's played in, the second time that he's basically done nothing. The first game obviously kind of got trounced. In the 1v1, it wasn't very close, but this second game, he's just completely out-macroed by Quid, and he's not nearly as useful in the team fight. Saint looks a lot worse when he's not on something that can be a primary playmaker. Now, is that the champion? I don't know, because the Azir was the most played in the Challengers League. There were a lot of games where it looked really good, or is this, we played Quad and Quid, the two best mid laners in the region, and struggled a lot more? I think it's up to you to kind of determine where you think that ends up falling, but at least for now, like the first 2 games of this week did not look good for a player that had looked great up until this point in Saint. Odilan and Henna were not the issues here. Henna has been fine. Henna missed a point-blank Varus ultimate in that final fight, but outside of that, like that more so felt like a mental diff than any sort of like gameplay problem. Odilan's been fine across this split. I certainly haven't been frustrated with him in the same way that I was in Winter when he was truly horrendous, but LYON is getting a reality check. They're coming back down to earth now that they actually have to play good teams at this level, and it feels like this team doesn't necessarily have answers to that. And for 100 Thieves, like I said, this team is very complete. Do I think they have superstar talent upside? Yeah, because I think River and Quid are very good, but I do worry about the consistency of this team. They rely so much on just being able to outskill their opponents, and they're not going to be able to do that against everybody. I could see a world where 100 Thieves does not have as much success as they have recently in the playoffs, but also, you know, Quid's really good, and so maybe they just have the best player on the Rift for most games, and Sniper's starting to level up. Maybe FBI can really start getting back into that more dominant form. 100 Thieves have the blueprint, they just need to be able to execute it. Then moving on to our second game of day number 2, and we really get a top-of-the-table clash here between Cloud9 and FlyQuest, and Cloud9 is going to hand Fly their first loss of the 2025 Spring Split with a pretty dominant victory, a really good one from them. Super impressed by how they've been playing as of late. I think this team has really locked in their own individual playstyle. They've gotten a lot more comfortable with the way that they want to move throughout the map and throughout the mid-game, and I think they have a good idea of where they want those resources going. That, alongside the fact that they have really struck gold with Loki in the mid lane, something that I did not predict at all at the beginning of the year, something that quite frankly I got wrong. I'm very happy to admit that. Like, Cloud9 is a team that you gotta watch out for being the best team in North America. Like, definitely they're in the conversation at the current moment. It felt like the ladder was really starting to establish itself with their loss to 100 Thieves, but this win over Fly kind of throws everything into chaos. For Fly, obviously their first loss of the split isn't the biggest deal in the world. This team has been basically untouchable. Before this, they've looked great, but there are some concerning trends in this game that I think could theoretically be taken out of context. Now, best of ones, you don't want to freak out too much, especially because I think a lot of the things they were bad at in this game, they've been really good at in other games, and I hate their draft and, you know, all of this stuff, right? I'm still not out on Fly, but this is a big win for Cloud9. I think that's more the takeaway here for me than anything Fly related. So let's go ahead and get into it. We've got to start talking about Loki as like an MVP frontrunner in the LTA right now. I just missed, right? Like talking about Loki's Challengers League tape, I kind of came into the year being like, well, this guy's a facilitative type of mid laner. He's going to, you know, it's clear that they want to try and play for Blabber, that they want to bring Loki and Zven in, these lower resource carry players so that they can play more for jungle and play more for top lane. And that kind of felt like the idea because that's what Loki was in the Challengers League. I'm not even going to apologize for that take because that's what he was in Tier 2 over in the Challengers League. I'm sure that's what they liked about him, but he's been given much more of kind of the keys to the kingdom, if you will, for Cloud9 throughout the spring split than he was in winter. Blabber has gotten much more into that facilitative role that he's been really successful on throughout his career, and everything is really unlocked for Cloud9. Loki is a tremendously good carry if you give him the resources to team fight in the back half of these games, and I just didn't see that happening year one. I thought he could become that. He's obviously a very mechanically talented player, but he didn't have the mentality to do that coming in to the year. It didn't feel like that's where Cloud9 wanted to go, but again, like, alas, all of that stuff put aside, he has been tremendous. He's been able to get pretty consistent leads in the mid lane. It's not always been perfect, but he was pretty good at that in this game, and then obviously you're going to look at the Rift Herald play, which is one of the most creative uses of Rift Herald that I've seen throughout, basically its entire inception. You're going to look at his, Shreem and Shuffle in that final fight. You're just going to see a lot of star-making plays coming in from Loki, all the while putting out a ridiculous amount of damage on the Azir. This guy is genuinely special. I don't think he's perfect, and I was concerned that he wasn't going to be able to do it against top-tier teams. Here you go. He just was better than Quad in this performance, and that's what you need to see in order to believe in Loki as not only an MVP kind of guy, but to believe in Cloud9 as a team that can play through multiple avenues to win games like this. You can also look at Vulcan, who has just been outstanding. Like, this is another game where you're looking and you're like, man, Vulcan probably should have been player of the game on the Alistair. This guy has been unreal so far in the spring split. And again, like, if I was wrong about Loki, I was right about Vulcan. I'm just so happy that both are happening at the same time. Both are playing well at the same time because they're both playing exceptional for this team. They're both really separating themselves from their competition, and that's what's going to make Cloud9 the best team in the league. That's what's going to make them the favorites to win in the playoffs, is if both Loki and Vulcan can really separate on that level. Thanatos continues to be the best top laner in the league. This was really the matchup to determine that, and Bwipo did not stand a chance at all on the Rumble. The Mbessa was just everywhere on the map for Thanatos, and this guy is just a monster. We called him the best top laner in the league coming into the split. I think he has more than secured that role so far in spring. Sven has been everything he's supposed to be, just this super stable, very consistent late game team fighter for Cloud9. The Ezreal was awesome. Going deathless is all he really needed to do in this game, and Blabber, to his credit, can still be a little bit too far forward, but if Blabber is your weak link as a facilitative type of jungler, you're in a really great spot. He still was pretty solid throughout this game. So for Cloud9, I just feel very, very good about them moving forward. And again, I don't want this to reflect too poorly onto FlyQuest, because in a best of 3, in a best of 5, are you guaranteeing me that they're going to play like this the entirety of that series? Probably not. Like, I would expect them to figure something out, but the fact that this is in there for Cloud9 is a really big positive, and the fact that Fly had no answer is a negative to them. Quad's gonna get dead of the game for me on the Lucian. This has more to do with the champion than it does with his individual performance, in my opinion. The Lucian was just not useful at all throughout this game. I get that you want to, try to get Quad into something that can be a little bit more aggressive in the early game to punish something like the Azir. Did not work. Like, Quad was never in a spot where he was ever going to be able to trade throughout this game. I think Lucian mid is just not really all that good at the current moment, and I think he kind of really suffered the consequences of that. Bwipo also just got outplayed on the top side. It's funny, Fly really won through their solo laners on day number 1 and got beat through their solo laners on day number 2. Just how it goes every once in a while, but Quad and Bwipo were not good enough here. Inspired couldn't really get anywhere on the map with the Ivern. I like this pick for them in a vacuum, in isolation, playing around, Quad being on this early game carry, and then Bwipo being on something that can team fight really well with Inspired on Ivern, or one of these facilitators that he's been good on. It just didn't work out. Cloud9 was better than Fly in terms of execution throughout this game. Busio, I think, had a couple of bad engages. It cost him his life both in and out of game. Jokes aside, Masu was also not particularly relevant in this one. I have really not been impressed with Masu over the course of spring. I honestly don't think he's playing all that well at the moment, but again, you're going to imagine that they're going to get into form. Like, Quad losing this bad in this matchup is not regular. It's not normal for how he's played. Inspired, I think, is one of those players you would expect to do better over the course of a series. Same thing with Bwipo, even though he can be pretty feast or famine. Like, as much as I want to sit here and be like, well, clearly Cloud9's way better than FlyQuest, I just don't know if that would translate to every series. But the fact of the matter right now is that these are probably the 2 best teams in North America, and the 2 teams that are fighting it out for the top 2 spots, and that's not what we expected at all out of Cloud9. This has been an overachievement from them, considering what they were last year, considering what they were in winter. They have really started to click. They found their own style, and I think it gets the most out of all of their players, and I, for one, could not be happier. Then moving on to game number 3 of day number 2 here, and a predictable outcome, if a bit of an unfortunate one. It's Team Liquid taking on Shopify Rebellion, and Team Liquid is going to pick up the win. I say unfortunate because this game was very sloppy from both teams. I think that there were some great moments from Team Liquid in this one. The jungle mid duo, once again, really kind of being the turning point for them, and that's what they have been over the course of this split, regardless of whether you want to think they're the best players on the team. They're certainly the ones that determine whether or not Team Liquid get to win the game or not, but for Shopify, it's just a regression back to the mean, and it's unfortunate because it actually felt like they were a team that could try and compete in this game, not just from their previous performances or anything like that, but in terms of how a lot of these players played the early game, it felt like it should be relevant in the back half. Unfortunately, those Rumble Ultimates, man, they were not good, and I'm certainly not going to defend Fudge on that regard, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Umti's going to get my player of the game, but I do think there is an argument to be made that this should be APA in the mid lane as well. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. Like, LYON is the best player on this team. He is arguably the best player in the entire region, although he's not quite been as excellent in the spring split here as he's been in previous splits. I think a lot of that, though, comes down to the fact that Umti and APA, they are the identity of Team Liquid right now. It's not even just the fact that they're drafting around them, you know, the Neferi, the Azir, like these more main character-esque champions, but like, go watch how they play in the mid game. It's just around these two. Like, LYON and Core put on an island. Impact has just not been good on the top side, and they've tried their best to neutralize that lane as much as possible. Umti and APA determine whether or not Team Liquid have any momentum going into the mid game, and that's just a crazy thing for this team to do. However, it did work out for them in this one. They definitely were just as good, if not better, than their opposition, even if Contracts and Palafox did play fine. On the other side of this, B-Boy had a really good game, which we will get into, but Umti was the most relevant player in the game, and this is what happens when you get Neferi. I think people are underestimating this champion, and I don't really understand why. I hear a lot of talk about Neferi being the best champ in the game, but I constantly see teams give it over to, you know, a team that is better than them. In this case, Shopify being like, oh yeah, we have Poppy. We can use that as the counter. Like, that is the counter to Neferi, and we feel comfortable with Contracts playing it because he's very good at this champ, not realizing that if Neferi gets an inch, like, that's when the game is over. To beat Neferi, you have to not only have the counter matchup, but you have to play the counter matchup perfectly, and Neferi can't get anything anywhere else. If your Contracts, your job in this game is to make sure Umti doesn't get out of control, and that just takes Contracts out of the game. I just don't really understand why there is the need to try and make this, you know, switch work. Like, why you're like, oh, well, we'll rather take the risk with them playing Neferi than him playing Sejuani or whatever. They ban out the Talia. We'd rather have the Neferi than the Talia. It just feels very strange for me in terms of making that decision, and Umti really punished them for it. He took over this game as a carry, and you know what? Umti's playing the best league he's played in North America right now. I think that that's not even all that close. He wasn't very good in Winter, in my opinion. I think he had a lot of struggling moments when this team was trying to find their form, and obviously got better as we went into playoffs and started playing better in the finals and all of that stuff, yada, yada, yada. But I don't think he was very good last year either. I was very vocal about that. I've never been a big fan of Umti as a player. He's playing really well right now. I think he's been one of the best players for Team Liquid in the spring split, if not the most valuable player. Him and APA, like I said, are the driving force of the team right now, which is impressive. Hopefully Umti can keep this form up. He's a pretty streaky player, so if this ends up crashing and burning, I wouldn't be all that surprised, but at least for now it looks good. And APA continues to be a player that is undervalued. I get that he's going to make some mistakes throughout a lot of these games, and, you know, Azir into Jace is not the easiest early matchup for a player who's already got the reputation of not being great in lane, but this was a good performance, I would say, from APA. Those shuffles at the end of the game were great. The damage he's able to output was really nice. He just is a playmaker. When he's in a spot where he feels comfortable, he looks great. You know, LYON and Core were fine, but somehow, someway they've become the background players on this team. I don't like that. I think you got to start playing for them a bit more if you want to find some consistency. Maybe they're just trying this out in the regular season to see what they can get away with, but this is a team that wants to make MSI. They want to once again win the LTA. They're the champions. They're the defending champions right now in North America, and they're not necessarily playing like it. Impact was fine, was the better top laner here. Not that that says much, but, you know, it wasn't exactly like a star-making performance for him on the Galio or anything like that. You know, Team Liquid's good, but I am concerned about the tape. The tape is not top 2 at the current moment, and I think that is a bit worrying for me. But for Shopify on the other side, man, Fudge just kind of let his team down here. It's a confidence thing, and I know people are going to say, like, oh, you're just, like, holding on to your opinion. You are biased, and you're trying to push a narrative, but genuinely, I want you to go back and watch these team fights, see those missed Rumble ultimates. Obviously, those are bad. Look at his positioning in a lot of these fights. He's playing scared. He doesn't trust that he can go up into good teams and actually play well. And if that's going to be the case, people are going to be right about him. People are going to say that this guy isn't going to be worth a spot in the LTA if he's going to play like he's nervous and scared all the time. But the problem is we know he can do better than that. He doesn't play like that against good or the bad teams. He didn't play like that on day number 1 against DSG. He looked pretty good in that matchup. He looked aggressive. He looked confident. He did not look confident at all in this game, and he really cost his team. Those Rumble ultimates were horrendous. This game was winnable for Shopify. B-Boy was playing out of his mind on the Ashe. He was basically, picture perfect on those Ashe ultimates, and it just didn't matter. Palafox, I think, had one of his better games of the entire split. Contracts, even for his greed of picking the Poppy into the Neferi, I don't think had a bad game, and Seos continues to be a good playmaker for them, even if he was a bit, I guess, passive in this game overall, but Fudge just needed to be a part of the puzzle, and he wasn't, and it really held back Shopify. And if that's going to be the case, that's a problem, but it clearly is a thing where he just doesn't trust himself, and you can hear that in the interviews, you can see it on the Rift. If he doesn't play with confidence, it's over. Like, it's genuinely unplayable, because Impact should be the kind of player that he can hopefully generate some advantages against. But Shopify is still who we thought they were. This is still probably a top 6 team. Losing to Team Liquid doesn't change my mind on that, but they're not a good team. They're definitely worse than a team like LYON, who's close to them in the standings, which is not really ideal. But for Team Liquid, again, I like the idea of Umpteen APA having really good splits and being relied upon more, but man, I just would rather see LYON get more resources on something like Kaisa and for Core to be more of a playmaker on something like Nico in a game like this. I understand maybe they're just limit testing things out, but playstyle-wise, I'm just not in love with where Team Liquid is sitting, and I do think it's making their inconsistencies a little bit more noticeable. That being said, their team fighting is still very good, and there's a chance that this is just, again, limit testing, and they figure it out going into playoffs and they start playing towards their star again. But for now, does this look like a top 2 team? Probably not in terms of the tape. You have to hope they're just going to get there. But then moving on to our final game of day number 2, our middle day here, and this is honestly the one I was the most excited for on day 2 because it's a battle of the winless teams. It's Disguised taking on Dignitas. And Dignitas is going to be able to pick up the win here. They're going to move to 1-5, and DSG, with really their easiest opportunity remaining, is going to fall to 0-6. It's a really bad look for DSG. Not only did they lose this game, but they lost it with a pretty good draft, a draft that they probably should have won with, and also, they lost it in pretty convincing fashion. They got 4 kills across this entire game against a team that had not won a single game so far this split. It's a really bad look overall for Disguised, and I think there is a conversation that needs to be started about whether or not this team needs to make changes now, like even before we get into the summer split. But for Dig on the other side, like, this is obviously nice. Like, it's good to see that they can win a game and that they can, start to compete again at this level. And I think they played great throughout this one. They had a really good game plan to play against the Neferi, but once again, I don't really like the idea of giving over Neferi on red side just because I don't think it's worth it. Like, was it worth it to ban out Abadaga's Rise instead of giving XU the chance to be able to take over the game? I get that it didn't work out for them. I just don't really like the idea. I don't like the style. Again, who am I to say, like, oh, Dig made the bad decision and then they dominated the game and won in 30 minutes. Like, sure, like, it's great to say that, but obviously, it's just something I want to touch upon at the start here, but obviously Shaden had some experience playing the Vi matchup into it because he's going to get player of the game, and it did not feel particularly difficult for me to give this to him. That being said, Kano was great here. Isles was really great here in this game. I think they were also in consideration for me. It's not like everybody on the team didn't win and do really well in this one. This was kind of a stomp across the board, but Shaden was the one kind of driving that bus for Dignitas, really creating a lot of the opportunities on the Vi. Vi was the first real, like, counter, quote-unquote, to Neferi that we saw over in the LPL, and we have seen teams continue to pick it up. I don't think it's the most consistent, but clearly Shaden liked the matchup, and his aggressiveness in the early game is really what separated this. This is a pick comp through and through. You've got the Vi, Ahri. We talk about it all the time. You've got a lot of poke on this team with the Jace and the Ezreal. You have ways to find, weird exchanges in the mid game with Rakan, and obviously Ahri charms or Vi just jumping onto anybody. This is a very explosive comp if you are able to get, pressure on the map, and that's exactly what Shaden was able to do in the early game. I think he's been pretty good across this year. I think he's been the best player on Dignitas, all things considered. Tomo, I think, has also been fine. He was worse in Winter, which is why I hesitate to kind of call him the best player on Dig. Kana was great in Winter, but has not been as good in Spring, and so, it's kind of just up in the air where you want to give that title to, but I think Shaden has just been good every single time he's played for this team, even if at times it's a little bit more difficult for him to establish things. I think overall, he is a good player, and he's definitely better than XU on the other side, which we saw in this matchup, so credit to him. Everybody else on the team also deserves a shout out. Kana ends up going 6-0-15 on the Ahri. That mid-jungle duo is really going to be where a lot of the action is created for Dig, not only in terms of the draft, but in terms of their players and just the way that this team is set up. Shaden and Kana are likely going to be the two that end up creating the most influence for the team, and that's what they were in winter when they overperformed a lot of people's expectations. Nice to see them get back into form, even if it is against the worst jungle mid duo in the entire league. Surdy had his best game as a pro, or at least as a tier 1 pro. I want to say that because I don't think it was all that close. This was a really good Jace game from him going into the Yorick. He did a ton of damage throughout this game and was very useful overall. Hopefully this is a confidence builder for him, and Tomo and Isles continue their good form that they had on day number 1 to carry this in to some success. So a nice win for Dig and a bad loss for DSG. Everything's kind of crumbling for this org right now, and I hate to really be the one to talk about this, but there's just a lot of negativity surrounding Disguise. Not only is the team not performing, but of course there was already a ton of discussion in the offseason about how, like, oh, should DSG get the guest spot, by proxy because they're quote-unquote the biggest audience, even though they didn't perform particularly well in Tier 2 last year. They weren't a top 3 or a top 4 team in Tier 2. They were a middle of the pack, middle of the table type of team in the NACL, and they still got the spot over teams that were more successful than them. The big argument at the time was the viewership and just, bringing that brand into the LTA, especially for a new league and everything like that. But there's no co-streaming happening for DSG. It doesn't really seem like their games are getting more viewership than anybody else's. It feels like the Disguised experiment has been a bit of a failure so far in the LTA, and that's really sad to say because I think there could have been something here, but the lack of success for this team has really, really killed a lot of the excitement that people had around them. And unfortunately, it's everybody. Like, XU is going to get done of the game here, and I think it's very easy to give it to him because he got the strongest champion on this current patch and just completely fed. Like, did not have even a remotely positive play at all throughout this game, which is not good. But Abadaga's been the worst mid laner in the entire league. Scary Jerry and Huki feel like they're crashing back down to earth after having a decent start at the beginning of the split. Castle has been way worse than he was either on Immortals or on Disguised in the winter split. Everything is just kind of going wrong for this team, and I think when you take into context the fact that, they had expectations and they were supposed to be a team that was representing Tier 2 coming into the year, I think everything is just not going their way right now. Obviously, there still is a lot to learn and grow from, but at least for now, this is easily the worst team in the LTA, and that's just a disappointment. And for Dig, on the other side, it's obviously nice to pick up this victory. Does this change my opinion on the team at all? No, they were number 7 in my power rankings already. This was the 7th best team type of performance. They beat the worst team in the league, but Shaden is good. Kana and Isles and Tomo, I think, can have good performances. It's nice to see that Surdy can perform well at this level. I just don't know if they're going to be able to find that consistency against anybody that isn't, like, Disguised, who is a complete disaster right now. But that's going to bring us to our final day of action here in week number 3, our final day of action in the positioning phase, and it kicks off with a back-to-back Dignitas matchup. It's FlyQuest taking on Dig, and Dig back to their regular ways of losing games here as they drop to Fly in a very convincing fashion. FlyQuest obliterated them, and we saw this coming. I don't think anybody watched the Dignitas game for day number 2 against Disguised and said, oh yeah, that means that Dig is actually just really good and that we all kind of had them wrong the entire time. It just feels like Disguised is worse, but FlyQuest does get the job done. They end the regular season here, the positioning phase, whatever you want to call it, 6-1, the best of 1 stage, and that is a really good place to be. Obviously, it puts them in a strong spot to be the number 1 seed, depending on where things end with Cloud9 at the end of this. Not that it entirely matters, but this is still one of the favorites to win the LTA, and I think they came out and proved it once again. I think the thing that really impresses me with FlyQuest is just how they play the map in the mid game. They don't give any room for the enemy team to be able to come back and try and fight their way back into the game. It's really, really great stuff from them. Player of the game is incredibly difficult because of that, though, because there's so many players on this team that do so much. I think Broadcast gave it to Bwipo for the Scion on the top side. I definitely considered Bwipo, and we'll talk about it, but I'm giving it to Busio in the support position. One day after dying, he ends up coming back here and popping off on the Renata. Really great stuff from him. Obviously, I love him on champions like this. He came up as a Rakan one-trick for the most part, in my opinion, coming out of Academy. Not that he was bad on, every other engaged champion, just that was really the one where he made a lot of his big plays. In Tier 2, kind of grew into something a bit more, playing alongside Doublelift, and then eventually getting, obviously, this job on FlyQuest last year, playing with Masu. It felt like he really started to find his own groove, and I think he's gotten a lot better at playing these early 2v2 lanes than he was, even just a couple of years ago. Tomo and Isles did attempt to try and contest, the Callista. The Ashe Karma is kind of the really aggressive version of the answer to Callista Renata. It just didn't really end up working out. Busio was excellent across this entire game, and I'd love to see the development continue for him. I think he's been better this year than he was last year, even with Masu, in my opinion, struggling more this year than he did last year. It's nice to see Busio really take his place near the top of the support rankings again. I've kind of talked about him as the definition of like a B+ player at this level, a very good starter, somebody you feel more than confident about if you're trying to win the league, but maybe not somebody who's going to be the best player on your team. In that instance, he could potentially grow into something more. He's just been a good support. So props to him. But Bwipo obviously got a shout out. Didn't even use the Scion passive throughout this entire game. Always a good sign coming in on the top side. Zerdy was never going to be the player that could go up against Bwipo. We saw that in the winter split when these two teams played against each other, and Bwipo really had his number. But the Scion, very consistent, was a gigantic nuisance to Dignitas, and that's exactly how you play this champ. You're just a menace. You're a nuisance. You are a problem. You're a gnat on the other side of the map, where you got to be able to answer the Scion, or alternatively, you let the Scion win the game for you, and, maybe when he collapses and, actually fights 5v5, he's the biggest tank in the entire universe, and so it just becomes a very difficult game for the enemy team to win if you allow that champion to get out of control, and he did. Quad had a really nice bounce back after what I would consider to be a rough day number 2 against Loki. It was nice to see him go up against Kana, another decent mid laner, I would say, at this level, and just beat him. Inspired was totally fine. Shaden was, we'll talk about it on the other side, not the problem, but also not the solution, because Dig's macro is horrendous, but Fly was better than Dig in every capacity, and they kind of showed that off here. And then for Dig on the other side, Kana is going to get dud of the game for me, but really the dud of the game is Dignitas' macro. Like, that is really what the problem was for them. They have no idea what they're doing on the map. They have no communication and clearly no plan when they're even in a neutral spot. They just have to hope and pray that they're going to be able to outplay their opponents. I think part of that comes from Shaden in the jungle. Shaden's never been a macro-oriented type of jungle player. He's always been the kind of guy who's just going to try and get a gigantic gold lead and hope and pray that that's enough to be able to win you games. At times it is going to be enough, but I don't think he's like methodical in terms of the way that he wants to play out the mid game or anything like that. And Dig really struggles because of that, because they don't have this upper tier level of mechanical talent to be able to take on a team like FlyQuest or to really be able to survive. But Kana's getting dead of the game mostly because this Azir was just completely useless. No damage, no plays, no movement, like absolutely nothing in this game coming in from Kana. He's been so much worse in spring than he was in winter that it's honestly disappointing, because he was a pleasant surprise, I would say, for Dig in the winter split, but he's just not maintained. He's not been very good at all so far in the spring split. Hopefully he can start to get some form back, but I just am not expecting that much out of Dig at this point. It feels like their confidence is shattered. Shaden was in consideration for dead of the game for me because, like I said, the macro was the problem, and he is kind of the macro leader for this team, and so to see him just not really be trying to make any plays throughout the mid game wasn't ideal, but I don't think he played bad. Surdy got completely outplayed on the top side, continues to have a lot of struggles against players who are actually good at this level, which again is disappointing, but I've already highlighted it earlier in the week. Tomo and Isles were generally fine, but also didn't get the most out of that Ashe Karma counter lane in the bot lane 2v2. Dig's just not very good. Like, we're not shocked by this outcome. Nobody's looking here and being like, oh my god, Dig got obliterated by FlyQuest. No one saw this coming. Everybody saw this coming. We knew that this was going to happen, and so not really a ton to take away from it. Fly looks good, Dig looks bad, and I think both teams are kind of living up to expectations, unfortunately, at the end of the positioning phase. Then moving on to the second game of day number 3 here, and it's another really fun outcome. It's LYON taking on Cloud9, and C9 keeps their good form up with yet another really good victory from them. They've played great across this entire week. I've been super impressed with what they have been in the back half of the placement stage. Really, the only hope is that they are able to keep it up, because if the form that they have right now is translatable to the rest of the year, this is the best team in the LTA. Like, the version of them that we saw across the 3 games that they played this week was the best team in North America, and I'm really excited to be able to say that at the very least that's in Cloud9. Do I think that they're going to be able to maintain that no matter what? I still have some questions, because there have been real concerns about this team, and obviously growth has happened, but how much of that growth is sustainable, we will see. But LYON just didn't stand a chance this week. They went 0-3 against 3 teams that actually know what they're doing, and I think this is the clear sign that a lot of the hype that people had about LYON was not true. Like, I saw a lot of people in Reddit kind of talking about LYON as a top 3 or a top 4 team coming out of week number 2. Obviously, I pushed back on that pretty heavily on this channel, but even this week, I still see people saying like, well, LYON's pretty close to contesting 100 Thieves for top 4. You've got to be crazy after seeing this week to have that opinion. This team is not even close to being on the level of any of the top 4 teams. They are better than the bottom 3, and they are a playoff team, but this is not a team that's going to be competing to try to make some noise in the playoffs, in my opinion. I think that became abundantly clear this week. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Blabber's going to get my player of the game, although it's up for debate, because Loki once again was terrific, this time on the Corki, a champion that I don't even think is all that good in the mid lane right now. I've talked about that pretty extensively, especially going into something like Jace. I think that can actually be a pretty difficult, matchup to navigate, but Blabber plays this early game so well and this mid game so well on this Sejuani. He completely out jungles Odilam in terms of the pressure that he's able to generate, to the point where Cloud9 can just do whatever they want on the map. Blabber has found his role on this team, though. This is not only his best game of the entire split, in my opinion, but I think it's really encouraging to see that he can pick Sejuani You can see a double marksman comp coming out from Loki and Sven, two aggressive marksmen, by the way. Corki's very resource heavy, and Tristana is certainly not like an Ezreal that just wants to play safe and passive throughout the entirety of this game. Ezreal was banned out, but like two aggressive marksmen, and then Gwen on the top side. You can see that comp for Cloud9 work, and you can say, yeah, this is kind of what we want to see for the rest of the split. We want to see Loki be given the chance to be a primary carry option out of the mid lane. Thanatos can just win isolated any matchup on the top side, and Sven can be that insurance policy in the back half of the game for us, and Cloud9 feels really complete in that regard. And when Blabber is there as the facilitator, when he's playing Sejuani, Maokai, things like that, you know, the champions we talk about all the time, he can be really effective in that role. I think you're getting the most out of Blabber in that instance. I certainly think you're getting the most out of Loki and Sven in that instance, and Thanatos obviously is going to be good no matter what, and Vulcan continues to be a playmaker for this team. So Cloud9, again, just really finding their idea, their vision at the current moment, and I'm really excited, really impressed by that. Vulcan was in the running for player of the game as well on the Braum, goes deathless throughout this one. The Sejuani and Braum going deathless is always a good sign, but overall, Vulcan's just one of the best players in the entire league. I don't even think it's debatable at this point. Him and Sven have a special kind of chemistry as a bot lane 2v2. Like, this is akin to Sven and Mithy in terms of how they play things out, not only early but late. They're just better when they play together. I think that has become very, very clear. Loki is the breakout star of this split, is in the running for MVP. Thanatos is the best top laner in the league. Who's to say that Cloud9 isn't the team to beat in North America right now? I know it feels like a crazy statement considering where they've been recently, but this week inspired a lot of confidence in me, and I'm just really hopeful that it's not a 1 or a 2 off, that they can keep this up and actually be a team that competes for the title, because they should. Look at this roster. But for LYON on the other side, it's very clear that this team just took advantage of bad teams. Like, I hate to say it. It feels really bad to say that, and I know people online really still have some confidence in LYON and, you know, can kind of look at some of these games and take some things away. This team got embarrassed across this week when they had to play real competition, like teams that knew what they were doing and not Dignitas and Disguised and Shopify Rebellion. Like, now that they are out of that cycle, all of a sudden LYON, they didn't even look close. Like, I hate to say it, it just was not even remotely competitive. This was Saint's best game of the entire week. I don't even think that's up for debate, and even then, it's not like he was winning in the mid lane matchup, and it's a matchup that he should win pretty hard. Jason to Corki. Henna was fine, I guess, in this game. Lions was a little bit better than maybe he's been recently, but the top side of the map continues to be a major issue for LYON. Not only is Licorice the worst top laner in the LTA, but he does it in a way that actually is very detrimental. I think if you look at that Cassante game in game 2, that's honestly kind of the best case scenario for Licorice right now, is that he's almost entirely invisible and that they're playing it out 4v5. As it is right now, he's picking things like Rumble and just feeding, like completely inting, not being useful in any capacity. Licorice has once again lost the confidence that he had when he was on Cloud9, and then when he rejoined Golden Guardians and kind of gained that confidence back, it's all gone like it was on FlyQuest for all those many years, and it's just unfortunate to see a player who has such high highs and such low lows continue to kind of be more of a negative overall. But Licorice isn't even going to get dead of the game here. That's going to go to Odilan in the jungle on the Skarner. Blabber just completely embarrassed him in terms of this matchup. I think this is easily Odilan's worst game of the entire split. He's been fine, I would say, for this team. Certainly better than he was in Winter, but at the end of the day, there is just like a little bit of a skill gap that if teams are actually playing well into him, he's going to have trouble like keeping up. Like, Blabber's too good of a player for Odilan to actually be able to contest in a lot of these instances if Blabber is playing the way that Blabber should play. And so unfortunately, it's kind of out of his own hands, and it's not like Lions is a good support. He's one of the worst, if not the worst, in the entire league. Like, Saint is a good player, but he got exposed this week. He played 3 of the best the best mid laners in the league, and he didn't look very good into any of them. Again, this was his best game, but against Quid and Quad, he got embarrassed, and he also lost in this one. Henna was fine, but he looked awful on day number 2. Like, there's just so many negatives for LYON in terms of what their expectations were going into these games that I think it's very clear this is not a team that's even close to top 4. But for Cloud9, like, this might be number 1. I'm just hopeful that they're able to keep this up. Again, we've seen, splashes out of Cloud9. This was a team that almost went undefeated in the regular season last year and then missed Worlds. Like, anything can happen for C9. They can, flip on a knife's edge, on a dime. At any point, they can just become, clearly the 4th best team in the league. But if they can keep this kind of form up, this can absolutely be a team that wins the LTA. Then moving on to game number 3 here of day number 3, and it finally happened. One of the bottom 4 broke in with a win over the top 4, and it's the funniest situation possible. It's Disguised taking on Team Liquid, and DSG does pick up the win. They get their first win of the spring split here. Team Liquid is the first top 4 team to lose to any of the bottom 4 teams. It's just the perfect experience here. APA's got to go bald on Cassiopeia. This is just the perfect, soup of things things to happen at once in the funniest possible way. This is everything we wanted out of this game. So big credit to DSG, big credit to Team Liquid for being involved in this at all, but there is some actual takeaways from this. Not necessarily that I think DSG is undervalued or that I think everything they did here is entirely translatable, but I do think there were some good things here that we can talk about. But mostly Team Liquid, man, they've got some problems. Like, this is not a perfect team by any stretch. This is certainly not a game that ever should have been close under any circumstance, and I hate to say it, but it's really one player that is holding this team back in a pretty major way at the moment, which we will definitely talk about. But starting with Disguised, player of the game kind of has to go to Huhi on this Nico. Obviously a champion he's pretty familiar with over the past couple of years, really over his entire career, even going back to his mid lane days. But Huhi finally getting a chance to look like Golden Guardians Huhi, like 100 Thieves Huhi, like the version of him that we had talked about as one of the best supports in North American history. This is the player that, was really up there in those rankings, and I'm glad he gets the chance to kind of at least show it off once in the split here, because to put it bluntly, it's not been good from Huhi over the course of 2025 so far. Things have not gone his way, considering what the expectations for him individually as a player were. Obviously, he's teamed with Abadaga before. Scary Jerry was coming off of a really great split in Tier 2. There were some real expectations that that part of the map could be a real strength, and it's just not been there. I'm glad to see him finally get a game where he can be like a primary playmaker for this team, somebody who can go out and just be the option to generate resources for them. Really excited to see him kind of pay that back out, pretty heavily in this one. So Huhi was the easy choice for player of the game, at least in my opinion. But you know what? Shout out to Scary Jerry. I don't think he's going to get the credit he deserves for this game, because he received a lot of resources put into him by Team Liquid. It was clear that they wanted to try and shut down the Varus, that they didn't want that champion to get out of control, and yet Jerry still was very useful throughout this entire game. I think Jerry is one of those players that I would expect to come out in summer and play the best he has all year long. It's just kind of the way that he operates. He gets better game over game over game. It's all about getting comfortable at a level for him, and I think it is getting better. I think Huhi obviously getting into form is a good thing for him, but overall, I expect Scary Jerry to be somebody that we're looking at as another potential candidate for one of those top 8 spots in the LTA next year, regardless of what happens on DSG this year. So I think he's gotten better. I think him and Huhi are starting to develop some nice chemistry there. Abadaga had easily his best game of the entire split. APA was not up to the challenge in this one with his hair on the line to be able to actually go up against Disguised, and Abadaga, to his credit, took advantage of it. He's a player that I thought was just completely mentally checked out. At this point, he was already not playing particularly well, and while he was looking aggressive, it was often in the wrong ways, where he was taking a lot of bad fights, putting himself in bad positions just to try to stay relevant. In a lot of these games, it's nice to see him go up against APA and actually be able to, hold his own, we'll just say. Not only hold his own, but be really useful with those Yone ultimates in these fights. XU was solid. Castle was the better top laner in this game, which is a good thing. Overall, Disguised was just better in this than they have been at any point throughout this split. Do I think that this is going to be sustainable for them? Probably not. I don't expect Abadaga to continue to play at this level. I think Scary Jerry and Huhi, while they are getting better, are not good enough to be able to carry a team from the bot lane, and overall, I still think there are some real issues elsewhere on this team, but at least DSG have shown that in the best case scenario, if Team Liquid is giving them free resources and free, situations, that they can take advantage of it. But for Team Liquid, it's a really simple conversation for me, to be entirely honest. Impact is not good enough anymore to be on a team that wants to try to make MSI or Worlds. They did it in spite of him already in the winter split. He was arguably the single worst player at the first stand tournament internationally, and he's come back domestically and not been good at all in the top lane. This guy's 2025 has been like licorice levels, and I get it that there are some games that look a little bit better than this, but he's been a bottom 2, bottom 3 top laner in North America. It's completely unacceptable for him to play the way that he has been. Obviously, he's done of the game, by the way. I don't even think I really need to go into that. The Renekton stuff was just horrendous, but just the overall package of what Impact has been so disappointing, and I hate to keep pointing out the narrative that he gets worse on his second year on a team. He's never been this bad. This is like actual worst he's ever played in his entire career levels of gameplay coming in from Impact, and they just can't afford that right now. and APA have been the primary carries, and APA was not as good as Abadaga in this game. Core JJ was too over-eager on the rel. LYON couldn't get involved. He was on Ezreal, which is one of his better champions, but he can't hyper-carry there, and once again gets the Nefiri, but this time has no support to be able to take over on it. Everything's kind of going wrong elsewhere. Impact just needed to be able to stabilize on the top side, and perhaps it gives it enough time for the Nefiri and the Cassio to get in a position where they can team fight, but he doesn't offer that. He gave so many resources over to Disguised and was positioned so poorly throughout this game. It's just not good. I'm all out on Impact on the moment. I'm genuinely Like, he's going to keep them out of top 2, in my opinion, in terms of contention. Remember, only one team from the LTA North can go to MSI. I think Impact might be the difference between Team Liquid making a run for that and not. That being said, they already did it in spite of him in the winter split. Maybe they can do it again in spring, but the rest of this team also needs to step up. APA is simply too inconsistent to be as important as he is to this team. Got the strongest pick of the patch and ended up losing on it again. Core was disconnected from the rest of the team. Like, Team Liquid just didn't feel great here, and they already didn't show phenomenal tape. Like, this is not a top 2 team right now, and I hate to say that, but like, maybe they figure it out once again in the playoffs. I just can't project that with how they've looked so far. This is obviously a great win for Disguise, but I don't think it really changes the outlook for them. This is still my projected worst team in the LTA. So, spoiler alert, they're not going to change in the power rankings because of that, but it's at least good to know that they can win a game if everything were to go right. This is definitely the biggest upset of the LTA split up until this point, and I'm kind of excited to see if this could potentially turn into something else. But that's going to bring us to our final game of the week and our final game of the best of 1 stage. Hooray! It is done here after this one. It was 100 Thieves taking on Shopify Rebellion, and 100 Thieves is going to pick up the victory. As we expected in this matchup, no upset to close out the split or anything like that. This game was kind of close. I think that there were some things you could, praise for Shopify, some things you could really criticize for Shopify. I think this game was mostly on them, though. 100 Thieves just kind of playing alongside what Shopify wanted to do, taking advantage of their mistakes, and then playing a really nice macro game, all things considered. I think people are going to be a bit surprised by my player of the game in this one, but I feel pretty confident in making it Sniper in the top lane. I think he is going to get my player of the game for the NAR, and quite frankly, he had a phenomenal week here in week number 3. No spoilers for who player of the week is, but it's certainly, should be obvious at this point who I think played really well across all of week 3. Sniper just played excellent in this game. I know the KDA doesn't necessarily indicate that, and if you looked at the damage numbers, it might not always indicate that either, but he played a side lane better than anybody I've seen in North America in a long time. This was like the perfect side lane game from a NAR, and maybe you don't always want that out of your NAR. Maybe you want to see him be a little bit more proactive in terms of the team fights and actually engage, although he did that as well. But going into something like Malphite, understanding that if he can pull apart the rest of Shopify, that their team fight is never going to be able to win 4v4 against Neferi, Azir, like MF, or Khan, right? They have way too much on that side. If Sniper can just play that side lane really beautifully, then all of a sudden the game is like a free win. He did exactly that, and Fudge really had no answer. Fudge was a little bit lost in this game. I think there were a couple of moments that were really good from him, a couple of moments that were really awful from him. People are going to focus on the bad ones, and we'll get to that when we get to the Shopify section. He's not dead of the game, and I think people are going to be upset by that, but we'll get into it. Sniper just was really good, and I do want to give him a bunch of kudos for that, but River and Quid continue to be incredible. I think it would be pretty reasonable to consider either of them player of the week as well, if you really wanted to put that in the conversation. River was exceptional. I think especially River really should be getting like shouts in that department. And Neferi here in game 3 was excellent, but he was great the whole week, whether it was on carries like Neferi on day 2 and day 3, or on a facilitator like in day number 1. It's just good to see that he can really function at a high level, no matter the environment. I think there was some concern for me. I've been a lot lower on River over the past year than a lot of other analysts. It's nice to see that I can finally be high on him for a change and, really call out how well he played and just general how well 100 Thieves played here in week number 3. Quid continues to be on pace to be the best player in the LTA, even if he's not necessarily winning the MVP conversation. I do think he's in, the conversation. I think he should be in the conversation at the very least, but this entire team kind of clicked, and I think Quid was a reason for that. He did a ton of damage on the Azir. FBI and Ayla definitely took more of a back seat this week, but I think that was honestly to the benefit of the team and certainly not to the detriment, because I think the bot lane has been a little bit more inconsistent over the course of this split. It's nice to see that they can go to other avenues and still be able to succeed, and that FBI and Ayla can play more of a weak side role and still be perfectly fine in that environment. Misfortune is a very good champion for that, regardless of what Reddit would like you to believe, and overall, I think that 100 Thieves was just really complete across this week. Sniper played the best league I've seen him play since spring of last year. River and Quid are excellent as a mid-jungle duo, arguably the best in the entire league at the moment, and 100 Thieves looked great. Again, easier schedule for them, but 5-2 is a really nice place to end, I would say, in terms of the split. They have wins over Cloud9, which I think, turns out to be pretty impressive. 100 Thieves is a good team. Don't underestimate them. And then for Shopify on the other side, Dud of the game was honestly kind of hard because I do think every player here made some pretty backbreaking mistakes. I would say that B-Boy was the least consistent player across this game, or I would say he was maybe the most consistent in that he was just slightly below average the whole game, whereas everybody else had highs and lows. But I think the lows kind of outweigh the highs for a lot of the players on Shopify. Palafox is actually going to be getting my Dud of the game. I get that he was 3-1-2 and had the best KDA here, but go watch this game, man. He was the problem for Shopify. I don't even really think that that's debatable. He was really bad in the back half of this game. His team fighting was about as bad as you could ever ask for from somebody who had that much gold on Talia, and I get that Fudge's ultimates were completely non-existent. He had some really bad moments on the Malphite, and that's the entirety of that champion, and so if you're going to do that at a poor level, it's probably going to be a pretty bad game, but at the very least, he was okay throughout, the points where he didn't need to team fight, and I can't say the same for Palafox. I honestly think his game was worse, although, like I said, if you want to give dead of the game to Fudge, I'm really not going to be all that against that. I'm not trying to protect him or anything here. I just think Palafox played worse, and, Fudge is going to be in the running for dead of the week. I'll certainly tell you that. Contracts had probably his weakest game of the week, and overall, just isn't really finding any consistency there. B-Boy and Seos were not great. Like, Shopify is who they are. Again, I feel like I would just be repeating myself if I went more into what this team is at this point, but they are who they are. They're going to be able to beat up on the bad teams, which are Disguised and Dignitas, and they're not going to be good enough to actually compete with the upper tier teams because they're just not consistent, and they play as if they're a better team than they actually are, and that means they can't actually get away with a lot of the things they try to get away with. This team really isn't all that good, so that is what it is for them, but nice win for 100 Thieves. Glad to see them back in the win column. They've been great across this entire week. It's all really just hoping and praying that they can keep this momentum up. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LTA North Week number 3 overview and analysis video here in the Spring Split and the end of the positioning phase, the end of the best of 1 stage here in North America. It's finally time to get into the best of 3s up on the screen, the ending standings of the positioning phase, of course, because there are so many ties. We'll get into the groups at the end of this, kind of talking about where everybody landed, but here is where my power rankings are, so let's go ahead and go over those power rankings before we jump into everything else as we go throughout the rest of this outro. Here, the only change is that Cloud9 and Team Liquid are going to be swapping places. Cloud9 jumping up to number 2, Team Liquid falling to number 4, and right now that feels a bit harsh. I expect Team Liquid to be fine heading into playoffs, mostly because I think they are going to change up their strategy heading into playoffs. I think they're going to start playing towards LYON and Core a lot more frequently. I think they are going to start playing towards their actual win conditions instead of just trying to force Umti and APA to carry every single game. I think Impact is still a liability, and that's the reason they are falling down to number 4, but for now, the top 4 are all super close. Cloud9 is going to jump up to number 2. Even though they beat Fly, I still have them at number 2 because they still have a lot to prove, in my opinion. They've certainly not proven everything that they need to, and, despite the fact that they've looked great, this was a team that lost to 100 Thieves a couple of weeks ago, and 100 Thieves lost to FlyQuest, and, Fly lost to Cloud9, and Team Liquid beat 100 Thieves as well, and Team Liquid, is coming off of winning the entire league, and so there's still a lot to be determined. I think whatever order you want to put the top 4 in is fair. This is where my confidence is on them at the current moment. And then the bottom 4, I think, are in pretty clear order. LYON, of course, staying at 5, Shopify staying at 6, Dig staying at 7, and DSG staying at 8. Despite that big upset win for Disguised, I still think they're the worst team in the league, and Dignitas is, staying at number 7 because they beat Disguised. Shopify, LYON, you could probably guess why they're in their particular spots, but that means LYON and Shopify are expected to be playoff teams. That certainly didn't represent in terms of how they played at the back end of this split, but of course, you kind of knew that. Top 4 is very different from bottom 4, and I think it's all just about your opponent. So, those are my power rankings. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with down in the comment section below, but let's go ahead and get into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week number 3. Player of the week, you can probably guess by how I talked about him in that final series. It's going to go to Sniper, the top laner for 100 Thieves. He was exceptional across this week, and I think there were 4 really good player of the week candidates. I'll get into that as we go throughout this honorable mention player of the week section, but I really want to give a shout out to Sniper because I don't think it necessarily shows up on the scoreboard. I don't think the KDA stands out as player of the week worthy, but he made some big strides across this week, and he's been much better across this split than he was in winter, than he was in summer of last year. I'm really excited to see if that development is coming along. He's been given the chance to grow with this team and I think evolve with them getting better, and I think he has evolved with them, so I'm excited to see if it's real. That Gnar game in particular against Shopify, he played the map so well. He played the side lanes so well. He's been really good in lane when he gets a good matchup. I'm just impressed. I get that the level of competition he went into this week wasn't exactly the largest. He played Surdy and then Licorice and then Fudge, all players who are kind of considered to be playing under their own standards right now, but Sniper still was able to take advantage of those matchups, which is not something I expected him to do going into this split. So he's player of the week for me. Honorable mentions, I have Loki and Vulcan from Cloud9 listed here as honorable mentions. They were the 2 standout players for Cloud9. Cloud9 for me this week, but I think River is also kind of an honorable mention here for 100 Thieves. Those were the 4 players that I was really considering for player of the week. All 4 of them were absolutely tremendous, and whatever order you want to put them in, Sniper and River, of course, from 100 Thieves, and then, like I said, Loki and Vulcan from Cloud9, it's up to you. But Vulcan's been the best support in North America. Loki is kind of breaking out and is like a true MVP candidate at the current moment. They definitely deserve their honorable mention spots, but I gave player of the week to Sniper. And then dud of the week is going to make a lot of people upset, I think. It's going to go to Saint, the mid laner for LYON. I don't think people are going to like this. I think people are going to say, oh, it should be Licorice, or it should be Lions, the support, or even Odilan, right? If you're going to pick a member of LYON Gaming, why is it Saint? Well, Saint was the one who lost the most consistently across all 3 games. I think he was genuinely the weakest player on LYON, and, you know, some people are going to say that it's really ridiculous for me to say that over Licorice. It's just how I feel. If you disagree with me, let me know in the comments section. I'm curious, but, like, Saint had an opportunity to kind of prove that he belongs in the upper echelon, and he did not make the most of it. His best game was that one against Cloud9 where he was playing Jace into Corki and was down in resources. It's not a good look for Saint when that's your best game this week. Again, I get that the competition level was a lot higher for him, but that's most of why I'm concerned about it, because these were supposed to be the games that he kind of proved that he belonged as one of the more interesting mid laners, and I do not think that that happened. So Saint's gonna get my dud of the week, and Sniper is gonna get my player of the week. Typically, this is where I would do the outro, but let's go ahead and talk about the groups. Group A and Group B, of course, it's a cascading effect of, you know, where these teams end up landing, 1 and then 2, 3, and then 4, 5, and then 6, 7, and then 8. You get it. Like, you understand how the steps of the ladder go. Group A is Cloud9, Disguised, LYON, and Team Liquid. Group B is 100 Thieves, Dignitas, FlyQuest, and Shopify Rebellion. These are very easy groups to predict because it does break out into top 2 and then bottom 2, at least in terms of playoff qualification. Cloud9 and Team Liquid are obviously favorites in Group A, and then 100 Thieves and FlyQuest are clearly favorites in Group B, but it's really going to be interesting to see who grabs the rest of those spots, and if there's going to be any upsets now that we're getting into the best of 3 stage. I would expect variance to even go down from here for the top teams to be even more dominant as we continue throughout the split, but that's just my expectation. Let me know what you think of these groups down in the comment section below. Reminder, I still have not seen any of the games that have happened this weekend so far, so nothing for me to spoil here, but that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We'll be posting about the rest of the LTA North split on time for the rest of this year, so definitely stick around for that. But we also cover all of the other major regions as well, so LEC, LCK, and LPL. We cover the NACL, Tier 2 here in North America every single week as well, so if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all